Thank you very much. Thank you. A little bit of a change in terms of actually what was titled as the subject matter, but hopefully you'll find this as interesting and compelling all the same. So yesterday I met with somebody and he basically said to me, really, what actually is SASE? Is SASE really just a marketing slogan just for you to sell more gumph products, services in essence to me? So hopefully as we go, I'll try and debunk some of that and perhaps just give you a little bit in terms of our view of the world and how kind of the very nature of security delivered to your mobile workforce and your branch sites can now be built and ultimately delivered in conjunction with us. Now, what I'm about to say to you is not really anything very profound. I think you're pretty much aware that your mobile or your workforce now is very hybrid in terms of actually working in offices maybe 2 days a week, working from home 3 days. And I think you're also very aware that actually your applications are no longer exclusively within your data center. We've seen an explosion over the last 5 years in terms of SaaS adoption and of course migration to public cloud. Branch transformation. I think what we have now started to see since we're out of the pandemic, but we're ebbing out of the pandemic somewhat, is very much the change in the shift in the nature of how we think about the office. So businesses and organisations that I speak to today, will tell us that they're not remiss of the cost of living crisis in terms of actually what this actually means in terms of number of offices, retail locations, branch sites that they are ultimately running, and how they're looking to reduce the number of people required in an office at one time in order to save cost. Now, what they're really sort of talking to us about is how can we sort of reimagine, reshape the future of the office? When do we need people in office? Work is no longer let's say, a place. It's an activity. So what we're seeing is that we're seeing a huge rise in terms of managed service builds, organisations now wanting shorter lease term agreements, in essence to perhaps accommodate their workforce when needed, let's say for some project-based work or collaboration purposes or some seasonal trend. So really what does that mean? So as we kind of sort of said, work was a place we went to, but what we really now need is our security to be ubiquitous. What that means is that we need security to be enforced to wherever the user is, wherever the branch site is, to ultimately wherever our data is, and everything in transit and everything coming back to the site and to the user. And if we think about, kind of as I just touched on there before, the premise of kind of how we thought about networking and how security ultimately was delivered, it was very much a case of it being the confines of the perimeter. Was, we all worked in offices 4/5 days a week, and only really at any one time was 15% of our mobile workforce ever away from the office. So really now, of course, what we have seen and what businesses are kind of telling us today is that they've seen kind of very much this shift in terms of users that are now going directly to apps, for no longer having the reason or the purpose to have to sort of tunnel back into what is a mainframe data center. So what organizations have kind of sort of, fathomed onto is that the idea that from a latency perspective and performance perspective, it doesn't make sense having user sort of access or sort of having to tunnel to a firewall, a VPN concentrator within a data center to access an application that no longer resides there. What we saw during the pandemic was that with kind of users that were accessing data and applications, they were actually going out unsecured because the latency issues occurred due to having that kind of backhauling of traffic, or the tromponing effect as we call it. So kind of just thinking about how our approach, how we are looking to redefine the very premise of how security and networking can be converged, consolidated into a single architecture, managed from a single interface, into a said architecture topology that can be modularized. Now, what we've done here is we've taken the principles of what Gartner defined as SASE. So Gartner defines SASE in terms of that consolidation piece of remote access secure web gateway, firewall as a service. So no longer needing appliance-driven security at the branch, but having the ability to create what is an IPsec tunnel to a cloud and have the security done away. That comes back to my earlier point about how we can provide agile services, security to branch sites that are pervasive and that can scale as and when you need it to. Network as a service, SD-WAN. Of course, as we kind of know, is that we're seeing an increased utilization of internet breakout as opposed to, let's say, MPLS, but we're also seeing an augmentation of that. I'll come onto it very briefly, but one of the benefits about our SD-WAN is to help you sort of make that move from or live in coexistence with MPLS network alongside internet breakout. And then autonomous digital experience management. So this is kind of sort of from 2019, this has kind of evolved. So one of the aspects is that we understand now that, you know, we saw, I think during the Christmas period, many of our customers that were telling us that they were having huge sort of user experiences in terms of, you know, customers not being able to access application, the time to remediate, the mean time to innocence for the network as well, for when users in the office, was becoming a real kind of, you know, weight on them. So what we have now through our ADEM offering is the ability through synthetic testing to show you across the network, albeit to the user, where the issue actually resides. And we'll come a little bit onto that a little bit more later. So kind of just looking at Prisma Access just for a second, this be one component of what is a SASE architecture. So what we're really looking at here is hybrid workers, mobile workers. Ultimately, you can actually deploy this as either a proxy, so a pack file, or you can have this as an agent on a device. What's really sort of compelling about this is how we've built it. So we haven't necessarily sort of put, you know, data centers within Equinix or Zayo networks. We've actually built this through the hyperscalers. So we actually built this through GCP and on AWS. I'll explain why we've done that a little bit later. But really what you can see there is that how we've been able to consolidate the very premise of access to applications, be it either if they reside within your data center, either it be into SaaS or to public cloud. And we are the only vendor, and again, I'll touch on this slightly, that gives you a guaranteed SLA to application. So it's not just about the latency, performance, availability of the service. We're very, very focused on the actual point of when we egress from our cloud to the application itself. It's a unified policy. So again, it's not two management planes. So one for SWIG, one for remote access. It's all done via a single managed plane and consistent policy across all applications. So just kind of just take a little bit more delve into that, and this kind of just comes into the realm of zero trust. Now, zero trust is not necessarily a product. It's a bit of a utopia, I'd argue, but it's people, process, and technology put together. And how do we help that sort of aspect of process and people come together through technology? So if you kind of look at here, the three sort of core components for us is around trust, continuous trust verification. So we have a kind of, a bit of a mantra in terms of, trust is continually monitored to identity changes, not just necessarily to the device, but also the application as well. So what we're able to do is to check the device for posture. So is the user where they say they are? If we see a ping or a user trying to access from a region that is not necessarily historic, that would become an alert. We'd also, through hit checks, make sure that the actual device is compliant to best practice policies that you've set and defined as well. Content inspection is very, very key for us. So this is very much a case of being able to look at the traffic in flight to, let's say, web resources. Now, one of the key components of this is that because we aren't necessarily a proxy, we are in line, our security is flow-based. So there's never ever really we don't break traffic to inspect it. So we're able to decrypt on the fly. Now, just to sort of come in to sort of look at necessarily some of the rigor that we apply in the second part of the slide here, just around some of our subscriptions. The thing that kind of when we look about security and how we apply security onto that traffic is what we do with Wildfire. So Wildfire, ultimately, is our threat intelligence cloud. It's typically what you might also know as a sandbox. But what's really, really, really powerful about Wildfire is our ability to be able to look at that traffic, look at the threat, run bare metal analysis if required, and then provide a verdict within milliseconds. Now, what's really, really, really compelling is the fact that if we see that as malicious code, we'll provide that update to every single paying member of Wildfire in milliseconds. So it's a community-fed environment that looks at over 6 billion threats a day, or 6 billion pieces of code, malware, however, whatever the type of attack, phishing. And that's ultimately because we're in line. So it's very, very powerful, as I say, as a community tool. But what we also really do believe is that sort of premise of application ID, being able to take a user, profile, and then starting from the position of actually blocking all, not allowing anything, and then actually working as to what actually that user should be able to access based on role and remit. Now, just kind of sort of looking forward onto that. Now, it's that kind of sort of effect in terms of the waterfall, in terms of once the traffic leaves the user, or once the traffic leaves the site, where does it go? How do you secure that? And how can you secure what's coming back? Prisma Access is built bidirectional, so we expect the traffic's going out and also coming back in. What's really, really compelling is what we see as our traditional CASB offering. We have visibility and control over, I think now, over 1,500 applications. What we're able to do is provide a best practice, a posture to each application and score that application for you. So we can actively say, this application needs this config, and as we know, misconfig is typically where we see most threats come through SaaS applications as an example. This also therefore tunnels back into how we provide the rigor, as I mentioned, in terms of security through threat prevention, and also sort of it feeds into this continuous trust verification model. Just kind of sort of looking at just in terms of the back end of Prisma Access and how we built it, is that we took a decision 5 years ago, ultimately, as I kind of just alluded to earlier, not to build this into terms of what would be seen as shared services. And the reason being is that we believe that, it's very much a case of it's your environment, it's your infrastructure. There's no noisy neighbors. So for example, if you're not having to sort of tunnel into a data center to apply security where you're sharing that with over thousands of customers, your IP addresses, your infrastructure, your environment. So as we kind of mentioned, the problem with that in terms of working with noisy neighbors, or if you see necessarily a SaaS application that becomes malicious for it, that then gets blocked for every other user on the service. So for us, that's why we took the approach that we did. We built this on GCP and AWS. A quarter of the world's internet traffic is seen via Google. And what this enables us to do as well, by working with Google and AWS, is it's not just looking at, say, the latency. Most vendors will take you to the middle mile. What that means is that they'll say, there's a service, there's a user to the application, to the actual where security is done, but then after that, you're traversing over multiple different interconnect service providers. What we've done is that we're taking you through peering, which we can do via the egress point of where the traffic and inspection is done, to the application itself. So we can guarantee you the latency and the performance. Now, of course, if there is an issue caused by GCP's backbone, you're able to claim recompense for the loss of service, because we recognise that as a service type models, us as a vendor has to be beholden. So, if there is that performance issue of performance, but what this is also enabling you to do is to further embrace SaaS adoption, public cloud, given the SLA and the backing that we will give you in terms of if there is any performance issue. Our SD-WAN offering. So again, what I was saying is it's very modularized, it's component driven, but this basically does very much sit into a single topology, an architecture. It's managed from a single interface. Kind of sort of touched on something there earlier in terms of how we are helping our customers sort of migrate from, let's say, MPLS to internet. We can do this through traffic steering. It's very sort of application defined. So like from us, from our perspective, from where we were in 2007 as an organization, where we embarked on a consolidation message in terms of how we brought IDS, IPS, web proxy, sandbox into a single pass architecture. We've done the same slightly for the SD-WAN side. So by laying that, looking at the application layer, not looking at jitter, latency, packet loss, our focus is very much on application performance. This integrates again with Prisma Access. So again, just through zero-touch provisioning, in setting up a site, you can do that in minutes with our SD-WAN and access offering. So it's it reduces the actual sort of time to deployment. And I think from customers that we've actually seen US-wide, I know that we've actually gone from basically sort of rollout from typical time of 15 months into nearly 6 weeks. So it gives you a kind of an idea of just how quickly this can all be done. Just mindful of time, but I just wanted to really just kind of touch on in terms of our ADEM offering. So it's very much point-to-point visibility. Everywhere across that network path, we are able to inspect. So it's everything from the user to the laptop. So if the user creates or raises a ticket, the first thing through the synthetic test, we can actually go all the way through that hop. So we can look at necessarily, is there a problem with the actual device? Perhaps it's just because, you know, I'm a bit of a dipstick and I've sat too nearer to the cooker or the microwave. Is it because at the end of the day, I've got, you know, CPU issues? Is it something to do with my broadband provider? Is it something necessarily to do with my Wi-Fi? You know, these are aspects that we can quickly help identify. And the mean time to innocence, as we call it, from the network, is to provide you with, you know, that ping, that synthetic test to say this is where your issue is. It could be the application layer. It could be even at the internet. Dare I even say it could be something to do with Prisma Access. But, you know, we can show you that dynamically. And it's really kind of an important part now of our offering, given the fact that the world therefore is so hybrid. Just to kind of just touch really on the use cases, it's very much a case of how and to where do you start your SASE journey, really. So what we see is that it's very much for organizations that are further embracing cloud. We're talking around that sort of direct to application connectivity method, secure web gateway, VPN replacement, branch transformation, organizations that are perhaps moving away from MPLS, looking at internet breakout, and want to leverage further firewall as a service as a method to secure those sites, and also with SD-WAN. And SaaS and DLP projects. So actually, typically over the last sort of 6 to 12 weeks, where now we're seeing more of our opportunities actually coming from the application layer, where businesses are necessarily sort of rolling further out, you know, SaaS or let's say public cloud, there has to be that kind of user experience model behind this to make sure that from a user experience issue, that there is no downturn to the customer. You know, should you be looking to move away from you know, your traditional data center, let's say. In terms of actually, just as a kind of sort of did really touch on, just in terms of, you know, Prisma Access, it's kind of the availability that we have with the lowest latency from a security processing, again, because it is just one path. It's not, as I say, we're not traveling over different service providers. It's one path. It's all for our GC backbone. How we therefore can provide what is the lowest latency, 10 milliseconds in terms of processing. And we have the industry's only SaaS performance SLA. So underpins all of this was, you know, not a great fan of just barking back Gartner reports, but it kind of does, when we are talking about convergence consolidation in terms of the IT infrastructure in the state right now, we are absolutely the leader. So if you can kind of look in terms of next-gen firewall, SD-WAN, and the latest SSE Magic Quadrant, we're the only vendor that actually appears in the top right on all 3 independent studies. So for us, this kind of does validate our approach in terms of it being a topology, an architecture, and it's very modularized. It's open API friendly, so what I would just say is that it doesn't necessarily have to intertwine with our SD-WAN offering. We do actually work with Prisma Access with multiple different number of SD-WAN providers, and likewise also for SD-WAN with other SSE vendors out there. And what's really, really beneficial is that, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is that it's very much a case of where you are on your journey. It can be built on a use case basis, so it doesn't necessarily have to be all today. It's to build it isn't that whole sort of do it all now. We typically don't see customers do that and start their journey from, as I say, a single use case, but it does really give you that kind of idea. These are the customers, just to give you, if I kind of look at our business over the last sort of 3 years or so, it's interesting. We went from being, our SASE sort of business was 5% of what was $3 billion company, and it now represents 19%. Now what is $6 billion? So you can kind of appreciate this in terms of our growth and the future of our growth is here. It's sort of very compelling in terms of the number of customers that started that journey with us, and these are just some references here for you. And with that, I think I'm literally up on time, so 1 minute, so there you go. So thank you very much. I'm here today as well. I'm joined by Colette Kittering and Ben Hurd. So if any of you have got any sort of questions or would like to delve a little bit more into that any further, then please come and find one of us. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.